Hello, welcome to the Stop C9 interview series, and we're really pleased today to have Leighton Grey. Um, so, um, the quiet coup against every Canadian's right to speak, believe, and disagree is the title of our series. If you, This is our second episode in our BLC9 series. I'm pleased to Leighton Grey has joined us. Leighton Grey is a prominent constitutional lawyer in Edmonton, Alberta. He's known for his expertise in criminal law and Indigenous rights, as well as constitutional law. He's deeply connected to Indigenous heritage. His great-grandfather served as a hereditary chief. Leighton began his legal career in 1993. He has successfully challenged the constitutionality of our legislation and the judicial process in numerous high-profile criminal defense cases. In 2024, he was named one of Canada's top 50 lawyers for his dedication shaping constitutional law in Alberta and in Canada. Great you're back, Leighton, for this second interview with you to discuss this one on the muzzling threat of Bill C9 and how that poses the threat to free speech and freedom. So how are you today, Leighton?
I'm great. It's a privilege to be with you to talk about what I think is the most important legal issue happening in our country today. In fact, it's so important that I've written a book about it called Laws, Lies, and Liberties, about the constant onslaught against rights and freedoms of Canadians and how lies and laws impact liberties. So it's my pleasure to be with you to talk about this issue.
Great, that's fantastic. So, how close are you to having that book available for folks?
It is available now. It's actually on Amazon, and so it's self-published because people can appreciate it's very hard to get books like this published right now.
It is. Yes,
but hopefully people will enjoy it. And actually, I'm working on another volume of the book, a second sort of follow-up sequel to it, and in that book, an essay that I've written on this very topic, on Bill C9, will be included there. But the whole concept of laws and lies and liberties and how they intersect is the real subject of the book. And of course, it's very difficult, as you know, Matthew, for people to get truthful information about these things today in Canada.
Yes, it is. What we'll do is in the reply post to the promo post for this interview, we'll put in a shot of that book.
So great, thank you.
That's great. I'm glad you're doing this work. It's really important. We need more of this. We need to get this to Canadians, what's really going on. So with C9, I guess first of all, just before throwing up sort of what, some top five of it, what's your first overall impressions with having studied C9?
Well, I think that the mechanics of the bill are deceptively technical, but essentially what's happening is they're creating this new offense called the willful promotion of hatred, through words, symbols, representations, and it introduces this concept of a standalone hate crime.
Yeah.
This is a very, very dangerous progression. What we've seen, in my opinion, is going back even before COVID with the Trudeau government, we've seen a continuing onslaught against individual rights and freedoms in our country. Yes. And sadly, in a real sense, our country has not emerged out of the COVID era in terms of the general malaise and the attack on human rights. And what we're seeing through these succession of bills, C293 was one that sort of appeared to die on the operating table, but its ghost is still with us. And C8, C9, C2, even C4, all of these bills are aimed at ramping down and really destroying perhaps the most important freedom that we have in a free and democratic society. It's been said that freedom of speech is the one right that you can use to win back all the others. And I've spent a lifetime trying to do that. And so to me, that freedom of speech is so precious. And what people should understand is that C9 not only is an attack on that, but it will criminalize speech. If you look at what's happened in Great Britain, and what's happened under similar legislation there, Great Britain has become the world leader in prosecution and jailing of people for expression of free speech. And so this is where C9 is taking us. And so it's a very dangerous moment in
Correct.
what I see as a progression towards the destruction of what Canada was and movement into, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, movement into what will effectively be a totalitarianism.
Agreed. A police state, totalitarian state, precisely. And to your point about what's happened in the UK, it is very tragic and alarming to see 14,000 people per year being arrested for Facebook posts and mean tweets, quote unquote. The idea that the biggest, that we should be criminalizing people's thoughts, that we're interpolating from their words as having a state of mind of hate, and we're going to take and spend judicial system and police resources chasing after 14,000 people a year in the UK are getting arrested. So that's a lot more people being chased. And then 5,000 plus are in jail right now.
Yes.
So we don't.
And the dangerous thing is who is being protected? Who is being protected from hate speech? You might have seen this, Matthew, but Facebook just ran what's called a blind algorithm. And they found that 90% of hate speech is being directed at white people and men. White people is code for Christians.
Yes.
And so who is really being impacted? And the effect of Bill C9 is not to protect the people who the government says it's protecting. Actually, the people it's protecting are our government. That's who's
Correct.
the elites are being protected. And the everyday citizens whose rights were intended to be protected under the charter, they're being destroyed. They're being vitiated. And that's a very important point I think people need to understand about this bill, because what people like Mr. Fraser, our Justice Minister, is saying about it is completely the opposite of how the Bill C9 actually impacts our freedom of speech.
It's like George Orwell. Everything that they say about these bills is 180 degrees from what their actual intent is. It's very alarming that the implications of this for Canadian society are profound, and we are going to enter a new age where people will be very, very afraid to speak out, whether it be online or in public speech, interviews, whatever, because they could be construed as hate speech, and off to jail you go, and a $20,000 fine.
This is already true in Canada today, Matthew. One example is in my work, I deal with many Christian pastors, and they tell me quite honestly that since the passing of Bill C4, which changed the criminal code and made it, that this is the gender conversion therapy provision of the criminal code, many pastors now will avoid speaking about certain controversial topics in the Bible.
Yes.
And so already you see, and that's, people might think that's trivial, but what's happening there is now pastors who are faith leaders in our communities, they're avoiding talking about important things that they would normally talk about. And this is the real danger of these laws. There are going to be a small number who are going to be made examples of. 12,000 people is a small sampling of, for example, the British population.
Yes.
The real danger, as you know, is the self-censorship that comes through fear.
Correct.
And that's the really the terrorizing part of it.
Absolutely. And it's like the strategy seems to be, it's like a fisherman throwing a giant net with huge, the grid is very far apart. They're throwing this huge net across the population that literally probably millions of people could be construed by, their Facebook posts from 5 years ago as crossing a boundary to detestation or whatever it was. And there's two things, we'll get into that detail. So this huge net, and then what are they going to do, of course, is now they're going to use that as an excuse to selectively pick out the people who are standing up and getting their, trying to resist government policies peacefully and just spreading information. And I mean, this is what totalitarian regimes do. They pass typically this anti-hate speech bills, which is criminalizing free speech, and then use that to selectively choose the people that they really want to get rid of and put them in jail and so on.
Yeah. That's a great metaphor. One question that I think people should ask themselves is, as Canadians, let's face it, Matthew, we've got a lot of problems in our country right now. There's a lot of things in our backyard that need fixing.
Yes.
Why is this government, is this brand new Mark Carney government, so focused on laws that criminalize speech, that change the structure of citizenship in Canada, that change the way we behave online? Why are they so focused on ramming through these bills when there are so many other problems that seem so much more pressing
Correct.
for
Correct.
Canadians? That's an important question to ask. And I think what you just said is really kind of presages the answer. And that is that they're setting up the terms of what their government is going to be like. And what's coming is going to be truly horrifying and very shocking to Canadians. In fact, it's going to change the shape of the way we live in our country if we don't stop this.
Absolutely.
So, we can't emphasize enough how important opposing things like Bill C-9 are.
Absolutely. And this is why the C-293 committee basically realized that, even though it's been reset, and the legislative session was reset, it fell down to the floor. We know that it's completely important for them to bring this back because it's part of the whole agenda they're trying to do. Now, 225,000 letters went to senators to complain about C-293. So do you think that they're going to come back and immediately do that first? No. The C9 and C8 and others are going to be used to muzzle Canadians so that people will not stand up against the bill. But by the way, C-293 not only takes away half of animal farms through overregulation and promoting insect proteins, but it also takes away bodily autonomy under the rubric of this pandemic plan, this pandemic czar that they're appointing. Literally, you have to get this mRNA vaccine or you can't leave your home kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that can happen based on these laws that have happened both in New Zealand and Western Australia. That's what it is there now. Wow. It's actually worse, but so let's just maybe if I could just flip up sort of just a gathering of some of the top 5 problems that let me see if I can go to this other view. No. Okay, never mind that. So vague and expansive definition of hatred, elimination of Attorney General consent for hate propaganda persecutions, criminalization of public display of symbols associated with hate, or 4, elevation of any offense to a hate crime with draconian penalties, 5, broad intimidation offense targeting access to religious and cultural sites. So those are the sort of the top 5 problems.
That's a scary 5 right there.
Yeah, it is. It is. And if I could just do the next one, the first one of the 5. Let me just move this over. Sorry. Find it. There it is. Problem number 1. The vague and expansive definition of hatred. Now, I wanted to have this so that we were still in the frame. Yeah. Okay. Not exactly. Okay. I don't need that. So anyway, vague and expansive definition of hatred. The bill codifies hatred in a way that, while attempting precision, still risks capturing vehement but lawful criticism or satire, as it hinges on detestation and or vilification without clear boundaries. This ambiguity invites inconsistent application, undermining the predictability required for robust free speech under the Charter. And exactly, because when you're trying to interpolate from someone's speech their state of mind, it's such an imprecise thing. You're going to have all kinds of inconsistent application according to the person who's making that decision. And here's the quote from this slide. Hatred, this is right from the bill, hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification, and that is stronger than disdain or dislike, unquote. Now imagine the average Canadian having to remember in their mind, first of all, look up the definition of detestation and vilification and be able to judge whether or not their speech is going to cross that boundary. I mean, because it's $20,000 fine or to jail. So how is that going to happen? What's it going to do? People are going to be too afraid to speak. They're not going to know what's going to be considered hate speech. Precisely. By the way, that comes from new subsection 319 bracket 7, clause 4 bracket 2. Cross-referenced in the hate crime section, this definition permeates multiple offenses, amplifying its reach. Yes. Okay. So now on that definition, let me ask back to the where did that go? Oh, there we go. This view. There we go. Sorry. Is there anything more on the definition of hate that you wanted to talk about?
Well, yeah, I just want to maybe distill that down because some people might ask, well, okay, why does this matter? And the answer is because it moves the law away from the objective acts of violence or harassment, which have been tried and true in the law, and into this murky realm of motive. And, Matthew, it's one thing to punish someone for example, an assault, but it's quite another to punish them more severely because a cop or judge claims to know the intention behind the act. That's never been part of our law before. And, so it's one thing to outlaw threats, but it's quite another to treat sort of blunt disagreement as hate. And these results are predictable. People will, as you say, censor themselves on questions of immigration, gender ideology, or religious teaching, because the cost of speaking plainly will be extreme. And so the process itself, seizure of devices and the humiliating headline will become their own form of punishment.
Yes.
And just bringing this back to the fundamentals of free speech in our society. There's a famous tract that was written by John Milton in 1651 called Areopagitica. And interestingly, this freedom of speech and state encroachment on it is not a new thing. So going back to the mid 17th century in England, they were talking about this same topic. And John Milton issued this tract, the speech, before Parliament as it was constituted back then. And he said basically that the only type of speech that needs legal protection is that which might offend someone else. And because let's face it, if I'm saying something that isn't offensive, for example, that Canada is a free and democratic country, well, nobody's going to be offended by that.
Yeah.
But if we have a conversation where we might disagree on things like, let's take a gender ideology. And there's an interesting back and forth going between Sean Fraser and Danielle Smith right now on this very topic. Well, the whole concept of free speech, as we understand it in the West, is that you and I are supposed to be able to have peaceful conversations about controversial topics without getting into fights or without risking the prosecution or jail. And in a real sense, you and I cannot have a meaningful conversation unless we can risk offending each other. In other words, I may disagree. The old adage is, I may disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Exactly. And it's important for people to understand. They might say, well, why is freedom of speech important? Well, late Charlie Kirk said this, when debate ends, that's when violence begins. And that's
Correct.
where we're going. We have to be able to have controversial conversations, ones where we might disagree, when we might offend each other. But that's a way of peaceful solving problem that we know in the West over time we've developed to a very high degree as a way of solving problems. We do that in Parliament. We do that in court. In my professional, we do that in private discourse. We do that at universities where we have debates. We do that in the media. And it's worked very, very well for a very long time. And what Bill C9 is trying to do is destroy all of that. And after that comes violence. If we take away one of the best peaceful problem-solving tools we've ever developed in the West, that's when the violence is going to really ramp up.
Yes, well, exactly. I mean, analysts smarter than I have looked at the situation in Western countries right now where they're implementing these laws as in a polarization that they're purposefully creating both in social media and mainstream news, polarization to cause conflict between different groups in society. It's very, very successfully. They've been doing this since 2020. Reminder that in 2019 they repealed a law that said you couldn't lie to the public. The consequences of this is that once people, as you say, are basically muzzled, then there's going to be very, very hard to have open discussion to try and resolve the polarization that's occurring. They're like shaking ants in a jar. They want this. This is part of their agenda. When people start going at each other, that's going to be the excuse to roll out the more totalitarian digital ID and movement controls and AI surveillance with cameras and all that. So you can see that this is certainly a script or a plan. Maybe I'll just jump, if I could, to number 2.
Sure.
Which was the elimination of attorney general consent for hate propaganda prosecutions. This removes a critical safeguard against frivolous or politically motivated charges under sections 318 and 319 of the Criminal Code, allowing police to lay charges without provincial oversight. This lowers the bar for criminalizing speech deemed hateful, potentially flooding courts with cases that target controversial opinions and deterring open debate. This is from the bill. Subsection 318.3 of the Act is repealed, unquote, Clause 3.
Yeah.
This directly scraps the requirement for the Attorney General's written consent before proceedings, a bulwark against abuse since 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very bad because now you could have, for example, a junior crown or even a junior police officer making the decision about whether or not to place a hate crime based on not having the training in the Constitution and the rights and being able to judge and understand everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, the idea that suddenly we need to have no longer an attorney general involved to lay hate crimes, because after all, these hate crimes for speech are basically interpolating what a thought is. And so this is really a thought crime, and they're interpolating from the speech that they're actually thinking hate. So that very imprecise, almost it's ludicrous that can actually be legitimate in law. The idea that a junior person can do this without any attorney general involvement is really, really concerning.
Well, it is. And it's deceptively technical. But as you say, it's quite important because, people should understand that this filtering process through political accountability, it was an important step because these things are tricky. Charging someone with a hate crime has political implications, and so what we see is the political class sort of offloading, abdicating responsibility for hate crimes onto police officers. And listen, I've dealt as a criminal lawyer for decades, and I've dealt with police a lot. I don't mean any disrespect to police. By and large, they're wonderful people who do a very hard job. But here's the reality. Most police officers know as little about the law as the waiter does about the food that's being delivered to your plate in the restaurant. They deliver the product, which is law, to the public. They're not lawmakers. They don't, as you say, they don't have the training, they don't have the understanding, and it's wrong to put them in that position. That's not their job. They shouldn't be the arbiters of whether or not something is or is not a hate crime. And I can tell you with certainty what's going to happen here. What we're going to see with these hate crimes is what we're seeing in Britain. The police officers are not going to question. They're just going to go out and charge. And we saw this in our own country with the COVID tickets. Okay, the police officers who were assigned to go out and arrest pastors, for example, or someone like Mr. Hillier in Ontario, they didn't sort of weigh the pros and cons. Should I go out and arrest him? There was a charge. They went out. They issued the ticket. They make the arrest. And that is what we're going to see under Bill C9. They're not going to act. They're not going to care what's in the food. They're not going to mess with the recipe. They don't want that responsibility. And so what this is going to do, it's going to open the floodgates. And so that anytime someone is offended, according to this definition, this emotional definition of hatred, they're going to make a complaint and people are going to be arrested. And we're going to see very high numbers in Canada, just like we see in Britain.
Yes, actually, we had a police force just about 3 weeks ago announce that they've opened a new anti-hate speech division, and they're hiring up police. I guess they were anticipating this C9 passing. Yeah. This is really a tragic development.
It's frightening. It's certainly inconsistent with the principles of fundamental justice which govern our country. And what we're seeing with all of these bills is a government that very brazenly is ignoring the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and ignoring the whole history of common law and constitutional history, which has protected individual rights and freedoms. The individual in Canada is becoming very, very small. And as the individual becomes small, the state becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is a very, very dangerous thing. That does not work well for humanity over history.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the next issue from that overview. 3, criminalization of public display of symbols associated with hate. The new offense broadly prohibits displaying terrorism or Nazi-related symbols in public if it, quote, willfully promotes hatred, unquote, with penalties up to 2 years in prison. While defenses exist, the subjective willful intent and public place restriction could ensnare educators, artists, or historians discussing history, stifling symbolic speech essential to free expression. Quote, everyone, this is from the Act, everyone commits an offense who willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group by displaying in any public place, A, a symbol that is principally used by or principally associated with a listed entity, B, the Nazi Hakenkreuz, I know how to say that.
Hakenkreuz, yeah.
Hakenkreuz, thank you.
Yeah.
Or the Nazi double Sigrun. Or C, a symbol that so nearly resembles a symbol described in paragraph A or B. Again, A is a listed entity. That's a list that can be altered. Or B, that's likely to be confused with that symbol. Okay, new subsections 319, 2.2, and 2.3, clause 4.1. That's where that's from. So I just want to underscore here that A in that list was a symbol principally used by or principally associated with a listed entity. A listed entity. That list can be added to, right?
Right.
So that's the real slippery slope. I mean, anyway, I'll just bring this back. And there we go. So, any thoughts more about this section of the bill about the symbols?
Well, I think any rational person can agree that the Nazis were bad people. But at the same time, when you start, again, this comes back to the subjectivity of the bill. What this is getting at is really the emotional response that people have to the swastika. But I mean, this is, again, people might say, well, I'm speaking in platitudes. This is a slippery slope, and let me illustrate how this is. For example, in Canada, they want to ban specifically the swastika. But what about the rise of anti-Semitism in Canada? What is the government doing about that? For example, and listen, many Jewish people, quite rightly, see the Palestinian flag as a hate symbol. Okay, what is the government doing about that? Interestingly, in sort of the panoply of history of 20th century murder, the Soviet Union rises far above. Stalin was a much greater, more prolific murderer than Hitler was in his wildest dreams. But the hammer and the sickle are not. And can we all agree that the Soviet Union was an oppressive regime that completed pogroms and murdered people? And I mean, for half a century, they terrorized most of Europe. And for those of us who are old enough to remember the Cold War. But why isn't the hammer and the sickle on here? People should understand, in China, Christians in China today worship secretly in underground churches because of fear of state control. So why isn't the Chinese flag considered a symbol of hatred? They're committing atrocities, human rights atrocities, all over the world. They're even terrorizing certain Canadian politicians. And so what this does is it shows how selective and how subjective this law is, where it singles out one symbol. And I'm not advocating for the Nazis, don't get me wrong, but there are contexts in which the Nazi Hakenkreuz, they're the swastika, is relevant. For example, in an artistic sense, if somebody wants to do a painting or a movie, or if it's on the cover of a book that is about the Nazis, that book might be decrying the Nazis and criticizing them and giving us new insights into the Nazis, although that might be possibly impossible because we seem to know almost everything about them. But there are contexts in which that symbol might not be hateful or used in a hateful sense. But outside of an objective standard, we don't get the chance to judge that because we just condemn it based upon how seeing that symbol makes someone feel. And this gets at the real underlying danger of this bill. Who is deciding what is hateful and what's not? Who gets to decide that? And again, I'm not advocating for the Nazis, but to single out, the swastika as the only hate symbol, which the left seems to love doing, I think that's seriously problematic.
Well, yes, in the sense as well that just only a few weeks ago, a cabinet minister stated that parts of the Bible, I think it was like Deuteronomy and
Oh yeah,
Acts 2 and some of the
that was
Luke or
Mark
something.
Miller.
Yeah, and the idea that they're considering now the Bible as hate speech in several
Yeah.
places, they're saying, "Oh yeah, it's a hate speech." Well, then is the Christian cross now not representing, the Bible and the hate speech in that? I mean, they could
Mhm.
easily, just say, "Okay, the Christian symbol is associated with hatred in their holy Bible, so
Yes.
that's a hate symbol now."
And
Uh,
that has happened. That has happened in history. And we should understand there's a genocide happening in Nigeria of Christians
yes,
right now. Donald
yes,
Trump, hate him or love him, he says that that the Christianity is being persecuted around the world. He talks about the great Christian population. And
mhm,
just speaking about Christians just for a moment, if I could,
mhm,
Matthew, words are this concept of the word is really important to Christians,
mhm,
because in the book of John, it says that Christ was the word made flesh. So, and the Bible is the revealed word of God. That's what Christians believe. And it's very important, even going to the book of Genesis. Christians believe that the earth and everything in it belongs to God and that God created everything. And how did God create the universe? This omnipotent, all powerful, all seeing, endless God. He used words. He
exactly.
said,
Yeah.
"Let there be light." He spoke the universe into existence. And so to Christians, this concept of banning and prohibiting speech is just fundamentally offensive, for lack of a better word. And we could get to the point where it will be illegal to even possess a Bible. We had that happen in Eastern Bloc countries,
Yes.
like Romania, for example, and throughout the Eastern Bloc. And so the danger is here. And Canadians, it's very hard for us to appreciate this, because many of us, like those of our generation, we're sort of 1 foot in history and 1 foot in present day, and we're astonished, we're in disbelief, we're in shock that this could be happening in our country. But we've got to wake up and understand that this now is the time. We were born for such a time as this, as it says in the book of Esther, and we've got to fight this with everything we have.
Exactly. And as more evidence to your point, I mean, Christianity is actually being targeted. I mean, the Liberal
Yes.
Party in the past 10 years, but there was an official question just 6 months ago in the House that was, and it's in the Hansard record, it was put in writing to the government, and then they put in writing the response, which was entered in the Hansard, and to the Conservative Party who asked the question, and they admitted, the question was, how many Christian churches have burned in Canada? And the answer is over 400 in the last 15 years. And do we see a whole bunch of prosecutions for people burning Christian churches, particularly since 2022, when they created a divisive
Mm-hmm.
issue around
Or
Christianity?
special laws dealing with it,
Yes,
right? You would think
yes,
400 churches, maybe that's a serious problem that needs legislative attention, right?
yes. And I almost forgot on the previous point. When people show from their words that they're full of an ideology that's full of hatred, great, because now they identify themselves, and those, free thinkers can look at them and go, well, okay, that's someone I don't want to hang around with. But if
Very true.
people are muzzled from sharing their views, how are we going to know who is actually, adherent to some, racist or terrorist ideology?
Yeah, that's a
That's
great point, Matthew. And the John Stuart Mill, the famous English philosopher, he called this the harm principle. He said something very profound about this, and that is when you muzzle truth, you do two things that are really important. You just kind of alluded to them. Number one, you don't get to highlight and expose lies,
yes,
right? So the obviousness of lies starts to disappear. It gets harder to identify lies, and so we lose that wisdom, that ability to discern. That's one part of it. And of course, the other one, the more obvious one, is we don't get to hear truth.
Yes.
And so that harm principle is one that, again, has been very much part of our law for a very long time. Mill was just restating in a very eloquent way what he understood the Western concept of free speech to be. And we're in danger of losing all of that and that whole tradition that is part of the foundational underpinnings of our whole society.
And exactly, and as you mentioned earlier, when freedom of speech is like the bottom platform of, given psychology, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have your basic needs, and eventually they build on top of each other, and eventually just self-actualization. Well, with constitutional rights, it's the same thing. If you don't have freedom of speech, you lose the ability to have, to defend your rights regarding freedom of assembly, freedom of search and seizure, from search and seizure, freedom of religion, freedom of association, all these things that are mentioned in the charter. Now, you basically are losing those if you lose freedom of speech.
Yeah. This is why, I don't know if you remember, but J.D. Vance was at this Munich conference earlier this year, and he was talking to European elites, and he said, they've become adept at justifying repression under the guise of safety, which is exactly what's happening in Canada. And so they claim to fight disinformation, but in reality, they're just suppressing opposition. And they claim to defend minorities, but actually they just silence them. And they claim to defend democracy, but in Europe, they annul elections. And in Canada, there's now a push to criminalize the same type of political dissent. And J.D. Vance said this is the greatest threat to liberty that he's questioning as Americans. Why should we defend Europe? Why should we defend this if this is the way they're going? If their views about things like freedom of speech and liberty are so distant from our own, why should we defend them? Why should we help them militarily or economically? Exactly. And so it shows how this concept of freedom of speech, as you say, is so fundamental to all of our relationships, not only individual, but in societies, but also geopolitically.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Now I'll just move on to this next one, number 4, which was elevation of any offense to a hate crime with draconian penalties by creating a standalone hate crime provision that aggregates penalties for any underlying offense, from mischief to assault. If motivated by hatred, quote unquote, the bill introduces a multiplier effect, up to life imprisonment based on perceived bias. This could transform nonviolent oppressive acts like protests into felonies, creating a chilling effect on advocacy against protected groups. Quote from the bill, everyone who commits an offense, if the commission of the included offense is motivated by hatred based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, is A, guilty of an indictable offense and liable for the punishment provided for in subsection 5, which is up to life. And that comes from new section 320.1001, bracket 1 and bracket 5, clause 5. The clarification that mere offense doesn't suffice offers cold comfort against prosecutorial discretion. Mm-hmm. So it's in simplifying this, what they're saying is that you can have a violation of the Income Tax Act. You could have anything that's federal law that you get charged with. And they can say, oh, but we've looked around online, some things that you've said, and you've said some things that we think are kind of hateful towards some protected group or any group, whatever. And so we're going to multiply the penalty that you're getting for this other thing. Up to 1 year in prison becomes up to 2 years in prison, and then 2 years could be 5 years in prison, 5 can go to 10, and then 14 can go to life. So that's shocking.
It is, and again, this is a really seismic shift in our law, because what it's fundamentally saying is it's codifying into the criminal law what the left has been saying for a long time, which is a lie, and that is that words are violence. Exactly. Up until now, our criminal code has identified and codified, and specifically identified specific types of violent crime.
Yes.
Things like assault and robbery, sexual assault,
yes,
homicide.
Yes.
Now, what we have for the first time in our law is now codification of the concept that words are violence.
Exactly.
And so people think of, for example, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Many people justified a public murder and assassination because they thought that what Charlie Kirk was saying when he went around to university campuses or through his other work, that was offensive to other people, and so that justified his killing. And in this law now we have the same ethos, the same idea, and so the horrifying thing about it is we could have people prosecuted and jailed for things that they say, and they could spend more time in jail than people who commit actual violence, who break into homes, who rob banks, who victimize children. And this is a horrifying thing that, again, is very, very new to our law. And just one corollary to that is, and we've seen this so many times with cancel culture, once you're branded as a hate speaker, there really is no defense, because any defense to this charge would have to be based upon an objective standard of law that is not built into this. Okay.
Correct.
So there's no objective. There's no self-defense. There's no other objective basis to offer defense. So essentially, once you're charged, you're convicted, and you're exposed to these heavy crimes. And of course, and there are cases where people have gone through and gotten acquittals, but they've suffered so much social harm that their lives are destroyed anyway. And so it's so punishing that people are afraid to speak out. And again, coming back to our earlier point, Matthew, the whole undercurrent of this is self-censorship. That's what they really want to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Canadians right now, we're suffering the greatest crime rates that we've had in my lifetime. I mean, we actually have higher rate of violent crime and non-violent crime than the United States of America right now. And carjackings, and we have the police in the Toronto area saying, leave your key fob at the door so they can rip off your car and not come in, not try and kill you. Incredible. Or recently they said, when you get home invaded, just comply. That's the safest thing to do, comply. And we see Alberta just in the last 2 weeks, they're saying, we're going to have a castle law now, and we're going to propose that. The idea that with all this crime going on, that now instead we're going to take resources of the justice system and police and start putting people in jail for saying things that are construed as detestation for some protected group, seems to me to be a misplaced use of resources.
You put your finger on it. And again, coming back to my earlier question, why is this government? You just raised a really important point that impacts all Canadians, and that is increase in violent crime. This is happening all across the country. Yeah. Isn't that something that a government that is interested in peace, order, and good government throughout the land would be interested in doing and dealing with as part of our criminal law? And yet we don't see them doing that.
No, we
don't.
We
see them doing this other thing that really is aimed at not protecting Canadians, but protecting an elite class of people who are lawmakers, and drawing this broader and broader gap between the quote unquote elites and the rest of us, almost aimed at creating a feudal type society. And this is very shocking. It should be shocking to most Canadians. Unfortunately, and I know you are working very hard to change this, but it seems like most Canadians are sort of like the frog in the boiling pot.
Correct.
And so hopefully we're going to get this message out to people before it's too late, because I don't know if you agree with this, Matthew, but it feels like we're running out of time.
Yes, I do agree with this. And in the defense of Canadians a little bit here that are not watching this broadcast, it's with $1 billion since 2018 given from the Liberal government to the various media organizations, from television networks to newspapers to radio stations across the country. Once you are accepting money, as a broadcaster or a journalist, print journalist, you're no longer independent, because your media organization, the difference between their profitability and losing money could be that amount that the government's giving them. And therefore, you're going to not be allowed to criticize. You're not going to be able to challenge the mainstream narrative. And we certainly have seen that since 2020.
Yes.
So, that's why it's really critical that those of you who are watching this broadcast, please do share with your friends and family and neighbors, as many people as you can because ultimately what's going to make a difference is people just calling up your elected representative, either provincial, especially federal, and just saying, look, I'm a citizen. I'm really concerned about this C9. I don't want you guys to pass this. I don't think this is an important thing at all. I think it's going to create a chilling effect on Canadian society. That's all you need to do. Enough people do that, they will back off. So anyway,
Yeah.
and write letters, etc. But yeah, we're running out of time.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I'll go to the next I think we were on 4. So the 5. So 4 was that one. Yep, and 5. Broad intimidation offense. Targeting access to religious and cultural sites. This creates a new crime for conduct intended to provoke a state of fear, impeding access to places or worship or cultural hubs, punishable for up to 10 years. Protesters, journalists, or speakers exercising dissent near such sites could face charges, suppressing public assembly and expression in sensitive areas without adequate narrow tailoring. Quote from the bill, every person commits an offense who engages in any conduct with the intent to provoke a state of fear in a person in order to impede their access to a building or structure that is primarily used for for religious worship, or 2, by any identifiable group, or B, a cemetery, liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 10 years. That's new section 423.3, bracket 1 and bracket 3, clause 6. The exception for mere information gathering is too narrow to protect broader expressive activities. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just remove that. That is chilling. I mean, I admit that, I've seen, particularly the group that you mentioned earlier, the Palestinian protest group,
Right.
really do some, direct intimidation and bordering on impeding access to Jewish people in Toronto and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see that's a problem. But I just think that using a sledgehammer, when you could have a more targeted thing that said, okay, within 150 meters of any religious institution, you can't protest with signs and megaphones,
Right.
something like that. So you have to be at least 150 meters away. Very explicit.
Right.
It's absolutely the answer. But the way this is worded, what if, for example, there are four streets that are going to where the area is that they're meeting, this particular church or synagogue or whatever. Well, if you're standing against, on half a block to a block away on each of the 4 streets, they could say, oh, well, you're impeding access because they have to drive down one of those streets and you're going to be standing on the sidewalk with these signs, and that's going to intimidate these people. And so they're going to not want to go there.
Yeah.
It's just, there's no measure of how far away or anything like that. To me, this is like a disaster.
Well, it is. And, again, and Leslyn Lewis gave a really great speech just the other day on this. She made a really important point. And by the way, I was really pleased to see her there with the Holy Bible, because we need people like her and Michael Barnett talking about, mentioning scripture. I think this is really important to talk in these terms. But she said something that is quite right, and I agree with. She says, we already have laws to deal with this. Section 175 of the Criminal Code of Canada makes it a criminal offense to cause a disturbance.
Yes.
So we have laws that have worked very well to deal with these situations. Mm-hmm. And so it sort of begs the question, well, who loses under Bill C9? Well, faith communities lose because their doctrine can be branded as hateful.
Exactly.
Parents, for example, who risk charges for questioning what's in a school curriculum or books that are in their school library. Feminists who fight to preserve sex-based protections in sport or whatever. Protesters, from truckers to farmers to pro-life advocates, conservative podcasters and Christian broadcasters. Most of all, everyday Canadians who post online, who use memes, jokes, and comments and satire can be deemed evidence of hate propaganda. And so
Yes.
Bill C9, as I read it, fundamentally, is not a shield for the vulnerable. It's not protecting the people it claims to protect. It's instead a sword for the boundlessly powerful. It's the law's surrender to the tyranny of feeling. And it's the enshrinement of emotion as ultimate truth. And so J.D. Vance's warning in Munich was not meant only for Europe, it's also for Canada. And if disagreement is hate, then liberty itself is banned. And Canadians now, we have a choice. Do we defend and protect our freedom, or do we obey a government that punishes thought? That's really where this puts us. And of course, the antidote remains the same as it's always been, but there's a cost for it. We've got to resist, we've got to speak, we've got to mock. That's one that is a useful one that we need to do more of, and just laugh.
Yes.
And also proclaim the truth plainly but respectfully, the way you and I are doing right now.
Yes.
And refuse to bow to this kind of cult of feeling, because as soon as we do that, then it's really over. And really the best example of this, is people want to read it, is George Orwell's 1984. And the whole 2 + 2 = 5 equation. It gets at this. It just puts such a clear picture in our minds of what it would be like in a world where there's no concept of objective truth, where hatred is something that's totally subjective, and it's determined by somebody else based upon how they feel about something that we've said or done. Mm-hmm. And that's cuts it. That's the essence of Bill C9, in my opinion.
Well said. Well said. That's a fantastic summary. I'm just thinking, speaking of Orwell and Animal Farm, apparently the people in Bulgaria, the saying that they got to, they basically hundreds of thousands of people went out in the streets peacefully and said, we do not consent. We do not consent. We do not agree with this government. They must resign. Yeah. And finally they did. They realized that they were overwhelmed. Yes. They did. And what did they credit one of the activists say? He said, we got into the mainstream media, that line from Animal Farm by George Orwell saying, we are being ruled by the pigs. And that went over mainstream media, and enough people just got onto the streets, and that's all it takes. You know, just remind Canadians that in the last 150 years of history, generally, that whenever they had 3.5% of the population who went out to the streets and peacefully said, we do not consent, we do not agree with this government, we're not going to obey. Every time they won, non-violently, when you had 3.5%. I think there might have been exclusions in, totalitarian communist governments already. But I don't know they have 3.5% ever either. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that this is what it's going to take. And until this happens, I don't know. We just have to do what we can to try and disseminate this information to our family and friends and neighbors, and let them hopefully get involved. You're
doing it, and God bless you for doing what you're doing, Matthew.
Thank you.
I commend you. But it's important. I guess my last word, if I could, is people need to understand: freedom of speech does not protect the powerful. They already have platforms. They have lawyers, they have wealth. Freedom of speech protects the powerless, the individual standing alone against the system. And that's Animal Farm is a great book to illustrate this. And if you strip that away, you create an empire rather than equality. And so what can we do? Well, we can do what you're doing right now. We can speak loudly, fearlessly, even when silence is safer, and maybe especially then. And we can build new platforms. We can gather in places where truth isn't choked out by mob rule. And we have to remind the world, especially Canadians, that a free people are not measured by their obedience to unjust laws, but by their courage to challenge tyranny. And I hope that's the message. If people forget everything else I've said here on this program, it's been my privilege to be here. I hope they remembered that's the key thing about free speech. It's our greatest protection against the powerful. Yes. And if we lose that, arguably the whole game is lost.
Exactly. Well said. Well said. Wow. I'm blown away. by that. Thank you so much for that. And just a reminder to people that our series is continuing on every week between now and the time that Parliament resumes to meet on Bill C9. We're having an interview. And so we have a schedule which will be appended to this promo post for this interview. And we appreciate everybody continuing to tune into this and sharing it with their friends, families, etc. So thank you very much. And Merry Christmas, Leighton, and Merry Christmas to the audience out there, and other religious holidays that are going on, Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah and all that. So we really just have a great time, everybody, and love your neighbors and try and wake them up. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. It's been my pleasure.
My pleasure too. Thank you. Find the exit button. Here we go. Goodbye.